Welcome. My name is Marcy Hampton, and I'm a faculty member at the UCF Dixon School of Accounting. In this short lecture, I am going to talk about MACRS depreciation. This video is video 2 of a 3-set video. In this video, we will talk about MACRS depreciation for tangible personal property. In doing MACRS for tangible personal property, the first thing that we want to look at is what are the preset classes that we have. The preset classes we have for tangible personal property are 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, and 20-year property. The preset class is determined by the type of property that we're talking about. For example, vehicles are 5-year property. Furniture and fixtures are 7-year property. The next thing we look at is what method is used. The method that's used to calculate MACRS for tangible personal property is declining balance. It is mostly double or 200% declining balance, but it is 150% declining balance for 15 and 20-year property. The conventions that we use, so that we'll have tables that everybody can use that will enable us to calculate our partial year for the first year and the final year. In this case, we have two possible conventions to handle the partial year for the first and the final year. The first convention is the half-year convention. In the half-year convention, regardless of when during the year that you actually place the asset in service, we're going to treat it as if it was placed in service halfway through the year. That way we get half a year's depreciation in the first year and half a year depreciation in the final year. This way we can build it into the tables and enables us to use the tables with rates that everybody can use everywhere. In addition, taxpayers are told to switch to straight line depreciation when the straight line depreciation exceeds the regular MACRS depreciation. Good news, this is also built into the tables, so we don't have to do anything. Continuing along in the convention, we had a slight problem that came up with the half-year convention. Surprise, surprise, we had manipulation that occurred. Many people started placing tangible personal property assets in service at the end of the year and still getting a half-year depreciation. It's a great gig if you can get it. The government said, I don't think so, and that led to a second convention. The second convention is the mid-quarter convention. In the mid-quarter convention, now regardless of when during the quarter that you actually placed it in service, we're going to treat it as if it was placed halfway through that quarter, which means that you're going to get half of a quarter's depreciation in the first quarter it was placed in service and half a quarter's depreciation in the final quarter that it was used. When do we have to use the mid-quarter convention? We only have to use it if more than 40% of the tangible personal property that you place in service during the year was placed in service during the last quarter of the year. If that's the case, then all tangible personal property that you placed in service during the year must use the mid-quarter convention, and we'll find that it's going to be based on the quarter that was placed in service. There are separate tables, therefore, for the mid-quarter convention, and within those tables we will find that there's a column for each quarter. So how do the tables work? How do we get the rates in the tables? Are they made up? No. Here's what happens. If we, for example, had a taxpayer who purchased equipment for $5,000, that's 5-year property. Basically, to do double declining balance, we have to come up with a double declining rate. The double declining rate is twice the straight line rate. We then take that double declining rate, in this case for 5-year property, which is 20% is the straight line rate, 100% divided by 5 years, double that to get the double declining rate, which would be 40%. So for 5-year property, the double declining rate is 40%. In double declining balance depreciation, we then take that double declining rate and we multiply it times the declining book value. That's why it's called double, for double the declining rate, times the declining book value. So essentially, here's the way it looks. In year 1, your declining book value is 100% of the cost. We said our double declining rate is 40%, so we multiply it times 40%. We're using the half-year convention, so we're only going to get half a year in the first year. So in the first year, we're going to take 100% of the cost. We're going to get 20% of that as our depreciation for the year. Notice what happens in year 2. In year 2, we've already taken 20% of the original cost in depreciation. So what's our declining book value? 80% of the original cost. We're going to then take that and multiply it times the double declining rate of 40%. Well, if you instead take 80% times 40% and just combine that, that comes out to 32%. Now I can take 32% of the original cost instead of having to recalculate a declining book value. Once we do that, when we get to year 3, we've taken 20% in the first year. We've taken 32% in the second year. So we've already taken 52%. That leaves us 48% of the original cost. Again, we're going to take that, we're going to multiply that times the 40% double declining rate. Well, if you take 48% of 40%, it's 19.2%. So if we multiply those together up front, then we can just take 19.2% times the original cost and not have to recalculate the declining book value each time. And that's exactly how the tables are built. The rate for first year for 5-year property is 20%. For second year, it's 32%. For year 3, it's 19.2%. Year 4, same thing. That gives us 11.52. This is the point at which it will automatically switch to straight line, because straight line at this point will give more depreciation than the regular MACRS if we continue it. Not to worry again, that's built into the table and it takes care of itself. So how do we actually calculate MACRS depreciation for the tangible personal property? What are the steps? So the first thing we do is, let's determine if it's real property or if it's tangible personal property. If it's tangible personal property, then we have to determine if the half-year convention or the mid-quarter convention are going to be applicable. Once we decide that, then go to the appropriate MACRS table for the tangible personal property, either the half-year table or the mid-quarter table. Once we do that, we're going to go to the column for the class of property. Then we're going to go to the year of recovery and the appropriate quarter if mid-quarter is being used. Once you do that, they'll show you the rate. Take the rate from the table and merely multiply it times the basis of the property in order to calculate the MACRS depreciation for the year. Now let's look at what happens in calculating the MACRS depreciation for tangible property in the year of disposal. Remember, if a property is disposed of before the final year of the table, you will have to manually calculate the partial year depreciation for the asset. The partial year depreciation is built in the beginning. It's built in the final year of the table. But if you dispose of it before the final year of the table, it's not built in, so you will have to manually do that. In order to do that, we'll follow the steps that we did just a minute ago, calculate the full year's depreciation. We will then take the full year's depreciation and we will multiply it either by 1/2, if we're using the half-year convention, or by the number of months out of 12 that it was used in the final year. Remember, based on mid-quarter, if we're using mid-quarter, you only go through half of the last quarter used. So if we use it into the second quarter, then we get 3 months for the first quarter, and we get 1.5 out of 3 months for the second quarter, for a total of 5.5 months out of 12. Let's do an example. So if a company acquires equipment that's 5-year property on 2/1/14 for $10,000, what's the depreciation in the first and the second year? Well, we see that it's tangible personal property, it's equipment, and we get to use the half-year convention since we did not place more than 40% of the assets placed in service in the last quarter of the year. So that's the table we're going to use. We then go to that table and then go to the column for 5-year property. We take the rate from the table for the first year property for 5-year property, and that's 20%. So the depreciation for the year is going to be $10,000 times 20%, or $2,000. Looking at the table again, we find that the rate for the second year is 32%. So again, we take the original cost, $10,000, times 32% for a total depreciation for the year of $3,200. Continuing our example, if the company sells the equipment on 4/1 of 16, now we have to do partial year depreciation for the third year because we're not at the end of the table. So we look and we see that the rate for the third year for 5-year property is 19.2%. We then take and multiply the $10,000 cost times 19.2% to get the full year depreciation. Since we sold it and we're using half-year convention, we're only entitled to half a year's depreciation for the final year. So we take the final year depreciation that we calculated times 1/2. Therefore, we'd have $10,000 times 19.2% times 1/2, which gives us $960 depreciation for the final year. Looking at a second example, if we have the same asset in the first example, we have 5-year property equipment that was purchased on 2/1 of 14 for $10,000, same as the last example, but now we also have acquired another piece of equipment that's 5-year property on 10/5 of 14 for $50,000. Now what is our depreciation for the first year? Now we have tangible personal property again, but now we have to use the mid-quarter convention, so that's the table we're going to go to, since more than 40% of the tangible personal property that was placed in service during the year was placed in service in the last quarter of the year. $50,000 is more than 40% of the $60,000 that was placed in service during the year. We then go to the column for 5-year property and the appropriate column for each asset. For asset 1, the $10,000 asset, which was placed in the first quarter, what we're going to find is that we look in the table and the rate for 5-year property, first quarter property, is 35%. Where that was calculated from was our double declining rate, remember, for 5-year property is 40%. Since this was placed in service first quarter, you would get half of the first quarter, all of the second quarter, all of the third quarter, all of the fourth quarter, assuming that you placed it in service in the first quarter and used it through the end of the year. That would be a total of 10.5 months out of 12 months. We would multiply 40% times 10.5 over 12, that would be 35%. Asset 2, the one that cost us $50,000, was placed in service in the fourth quarter. If you look in the tables, you will find that the rate for 5-year property, fourth quarter property, is 5%. Again, based on the double declining rate of 40%, but now since it was placed in service in the fourth quarter, we only are going to get half of the fourth quarter, or 1.5 out of 12 months, times 40%. So our rate is going to be 5%. So the depreciation for the first year is going to be asset 1, the cost of $10,000, times 35%, or $3,500. Asset 2, $50,000 times 5%, or $2,500, for a total depreciation for the first year of $6,000. And that's how we do MACRS for tangible personal property.